Hi everyone, Bianca Raby here. This conversation was incredible. So I've just been speaking to Ulrik Christensen, the CEO of Area9 Lyceum, and he shares his deep expertise and passion for transforming education. Ulrik has dedicated over 30 years to researching what truly matters in learning and why traditional education systems often fall short. He argues that the goal of education should shift from producing knowledge robots to empowering students with critical thinking, creativity, and the power skills, not soft skills, needed to thrive in our rapidly changing world. Of course, we talk about AI and technology in education, and he draws parallels to his studies on high-performing groups like cave divers, highlighting the importance of creating learning environments that push students to their uncomfortable zone, where true development happens. Throughout the discussion, Ulrik emphasises the need to rethink assessment, moving away from high-stakes testing towards more holistic evaluation of students' real-world skills and passions. He argues that education must evolve to reflect the realities of our rapidly changing technology-driven world, and a world where the ability to learn, adapt, and collaborate will be essential for both individual and societal success. So stay tuned for an amazing interview where we discuss all things education and teaching and learning in the future. Hi everyone, I'm super excited today. I've got Ulrik Christensen here from Area9, the CEO. We're going to have a very exciting conversation. We just had our own little preamble, and my challenge is to get all of that good stuff that we just spoke about into this interview. So let's hope we can get all these stories we just had offline. So Ulrik, would you like to introduce yourself to the viewers of this channel, mostly teachers, which is they're all excited to learn about technology. So maybe give us a bit of your
Absolutely.
background.
And thanks for having me here on the show. So I think yeah, I'm the CEO of Area9 Lyceum, but more importantly, I'm interested in education, and I have had this luxury for more than 30 years to be researching what actually matters in learning. Why doesn't education system always work, and what can we do about it? So I've for years, apart from being leading this company and in the company as well, been responsible for all of our product R&D and particularly the stuff related to what actually makes learning really work and have an impact.
Brilliant. And, Area9 is, if anyone's, going to go down to the show notes and have a look, it's all about adaptive learning, and it's very technology based, and we are going to talk about that. But I think first I want to pick up on what you just said about what is it that really matters in teaching and learning, because a lot of us on this, in this journey who've been here for a long time, we know that there's a lot of problems with the system that we have. And, we've talked a lot about the problems, I think. And I think what's exciting for me watching AI is come up with some solutions. But from your perspective, what does it really mean for mastery? And I know you've just finished a manuscript on a book to do with this. So do you want to talk a little bit about what is teaching and learning now?
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting that we have this challenge that is not the same. So I've had this privilege to have worked with all levels of, from you can read in second grade all the way up through education of specialist physicians and special forces and fighter pilots at the end of their careers, and everything in between, like at scale with some of the largest publishers in the world. And we've had millions and millions of students going through this, and are still today working on some of the most high stakes education systems. Therefore, it's interesting to then figure out, how does learning that works or learning that matters actually separate itself from all the learning out there that often people are frustrated with or are critical of or afraid is not what is important for the future. And I think one of the pressure tests that we often forget to put our learning engineering, as we often refer to it, and the learning architecture behind it too, is, does it actually matter? Why are we doing this? Are we building systems to sort kids into buckets so that we know who should be allowed to become a physician, who should actually go into trade school?
Yeah.
Or are we building educational systems to prepare kids and actually also adults for living in a world where you do things that matter to you, that matter to your surroundings around you, to your employer or your future employer, and maybe even to the society at whole? We're looking at a world where suddenly we're becoming global citizens in no time. And when we then, at all levels, in the country I grew up in the 70s, we thought we could just bypass all of these things and move straight to let's make great citizens and forget about multiplication tables, and let's, like, it didn't matter whether you could spell and all this kind of good stuff. And then later we found out that it's probably an interaction between the two. So learning that matters is, for me, means actually learning that has led you to something where you have a big toolbox of things you master in isolation, but you can also put them together, not just for yourself, but as part of you being in other environments together with your colleagues, but also as society as a whole.
Absolutely. And that's that fit for purpose conversation we've been having for a while. It's like the system, has been designed a very long time ago for a very different workforce. And I think that's what's really, confronting a lot of people at the moment, even though it's sort of been creeping in, is that technology is here to stay and our workforce has changed and the needs of society have changed, and what it takes to be a productive member in this new world of tech is changing. And so I think that's also a great segue into teachers fearing a little bit about AI and, because of the knowledge in the pocket. But I mean, we've had knowledge in our pocket since Google, but we're having access to knowledge in our pocket a little bit more intensely now through AI. And so there has been, a bit of a fear from teachers that this may replace them. So what's your thoughts on that kind of idea? And what would you say to our teachers about that?
Yeah. So one of the things that has profoundly changed is that, yes, we may have had access to knowledge in our pocket, but it is a quantum leap that you do not only have knowledge, you even have explanations.
Yes.
You're moving an abstraction level up,
Mhm.
off an abstraction level that is often what we've come to teachers to get. Like, you're able to get like separate pieces of information, but putting them together was harder. That's what large language models are bringing to the table, is like, you really have good explanations available at any given time. But it also leads to, and has hopefully led to, a lot of self-reflection. When we've had the debates about why did we even need history education anymore? Well, let's just do some more math, right? But the answer is we probably need both, because what is one of the few, like, history is one of the most extreme cases, and math is at the other end of that spectrum, where in history you use relatively few concepts. It's just extremely hard to get really good at them. Whereas math is a gazillion separate real concepts and real conceptual chunks that you then also need to master. But if you look at history, what is one of those? It's being critical of the source, being able to figure out, where does this come from? Can I actually trust the information in front of my eyes? And what is the most important skill to have in the modern world of large language models around us? Exactly that. Because you actually can use it only in the case where you're able to judge critically whether this is really what I need here.
It's crucial to check information from GPTs. Why? Discover the big reason in this video.
It's great that I could get it fast, but now I need to apply this filter that in traditional education we've typically learned in history education, critique sources. So it's a good example of, there are some generic skills that are really important in this world where explanations are all around us, and where the goal, and for sure mastery, is not a matter of educating more human hard drives of information, but more humans who can actually ask the questions to utilizing and benefiting from this technology, think critically enough to know whether you can rely on what's there, and then being able to integrate it into the world around them. So in some ways you can say it's from moving from producing students who had the right answers to students who were able to ask the right questions. And that's a really big shift in how we should equip our education system.
And that really plays into there's been a lot more rhetoric, I believe, in the last 10 years around the soft skills, because I think we've noticed, obviously, students coming through the system and then still feeling like they don't have the ability to sort of build really good relationships or to succeed in their first job, and those sort of resilience and, softer kind of skills. And so I've been seeing AI as an awesome opportunity to sort of free up teachers to focus on that stuff a lot more instead of routine knowledge kind of stuff. So because if you can use adaptive learning like, Area9 and what you guys have been doing to kind of do that knowledge piece, ideally you have the teacher with a little bit more spare brain space and ability to do the face-to-face sort of work. So how have you been seeing that work? So what are those soft skills, are they actually coming forward as being more important in the schools that you're working with?
It's interesting because I always, and I know that a dear friend and mentor of mine, whom I worked with back in the 90s, making simulators for physicians,
Right.
also have the same visceral reaction when people call them soft skills.
I know.
I'm like,
It's terrible.
soft skills? Are you
They're not
crazy?
soft. They're real.
We were working
Yeah.
so hard
Mm.
to see if we could move them. They're not soft. They're some of the most important ones,
Yeah.
and they're really, really hard to build. So they're
Yeah.
not soft at all. They're extremely tough
Life
skills,
skills. Yeah.
life skills, power skills, just something else than soft skills.
Mhm.
And the interesting thing was that a lot of this work actually started before there was any mention of soft skills or 21st century skills or all this. And it
Mhm.
started in other areas. It started in high performance, high reliability areas like pilots or physicians. I came into this from a background in medicine and I was trained as a physician, but already back then I got fascinated with why does the education system not work for these things? So we were
Mhm.
building simulators. We were working on these hardest problems out there, the power
Yeah.
skills, and not just the classic 4Cs, but also all the ones that falls into the character category,
Yeah.
resilience, curiosity, leadership, all these other critically important skills. And what we found was that, and this is very similar to the problem you have in classroom and the problem you brought up was that if you clock the system with talking about in healthcare, whether it's 5 milligrams or it's 10 milligrams, trying to memorize one side effect rather than another.
Mm.
And we never get to actually again and again and again work on those power skills,
Mhm.
including the power skills of being able to learn more. Then we don't get anywhere. And the reason why I've ended up on a 15-year detour of my career that luckily stopped about 5 years ago because we're still doing it. We're still doing adaptive learning, but we solved the
Mhm.
problem. We now
Yep.
know how to deal with that. So we can go back to looking at how do we get to actually making people better learners in general? Can we build the metacognitive ability that are not only applicable to acquiring knowledge and integrating knowledge, but also to realizing that I'm actually not where I want to be in terms of resilience. And it's a lot of people are underestimating this, I think, how important it is. Not teachers. Teachers know it's important. A
Mhm.
lot of teachers has been kicking and screaming, saying, we need more of this. We need to
Mm.
improve the social wellness of the kids because they are getting mentally affected by this at a rate we've never seen before in their
Mhm.
pursuit of SAT scores, the likes. But what do we do? How do we actually break out of this mold? And I think that there are two things that are important. One of them is it's a big mistake what has happened in many places to just disregard the need for knowledge acquisition.
Right.
You still need knowledge. Like it's really, really hard to have
Yeah.
meaningful shaping of the other skills with no building blocks.
It's the
But
foundation, right? Yeah.
it's a foundation, and first you have to go through years of collecting building blocks. What if you're not allowed to play with your Lego pieces as you are getting them? Hey, you're
Mm.
going to collect Lego pieces for 9 years, and then you can start to build with them. That's
Mhm.
not going to work either. And I
No.
think that that interaction between the two is super important.
Yeah, I mean, I love that you call them power skills, by the way. It's brilliant. And I've been reading The Anxious Generation right now. I'm sure you've heard of that book, and it's been quite confronting, I must say. And I think it to a conversation we had just before this conversation live was around, what is the end goal? And you're doing some work with cave divers, I hear, around like understanding that, because in the end, can be about life or death, or it can be about integrating into society or not, or fulfilling life or a life of struggle. And so when we think about what is the reason we're educating, and then we talk about these power skills, I'm now going to call them, thank you for that. And this is what you said, teachers have been screaming out for this because they're looking at the kids and they're going, hang on a minute, like they're not functioning really well in the world when they come out. So can you talk to what brought you to that cave diver kind of analogy, or not even analogy, you've been studying it, and how that's translating back to the classroom?
Yeah, absolutely. I've always found a lot of inspiration in trying to understand how people around me learn and how I learn myself. And I happen to be super passionate about diving anyway. And then I
Okay.
ran into this organization and I was teaching diving for other organizations. And I suddenly realized that I'd gotten a lot of it upside down.
Right.
I'd simply not understood how much better you could do it. And of course, I found something that was the way I design things in any way, but they had gotten there in a completely different way. Most people who end up with curricula or with learning architecture like that have hired people like myself or others, and then
Mm.
you decided bottom up. Here we had something that was a little bit like the bee that doesn't know it cannot fly. And I got
Mm-hmm.
super fascinated about how did they get so good? And
Right.
what are the things that they're doing that have kept them alive? And I sometimes refer to it that for them, it was actually not science. It was the art of not dying in caves. And the thing was that the real goal was that they were so passionate about it. And while I would say that most people would say it's a decision you make, they're not paid for it. They actually paid to do these things often. They funded themselves. Some of the best cave divers in the world are poor as rats. Like there is no external acknowledgement, really,
No.
in many ways, except for other cave divers. And they're still so driven. But most people would say they don't have to do it. So you have the extreme risk, the ultimate risk, you will die. So it's not like special forces that I've also studied, where at least you're doing this for your country. Here they're doing it just because of a deep, deep curiosity about what's around the next corner. How do we connect 500 kilometers of caves in Mexico? How do we make this possible?
Yeah.
But with the ultimate risk that they will die. So working back from there, looking at what are the traits and what could we learn from it? Like, how could we from studying top performers like that who have ended up with extremely high performance education? And the interesting thing is they put education first. Even though exploration is the goal, knew that education was necessary to put first, because otherwise you should not go into those caves. You should not go on these expeditions.
It's huge risk.
It's huge risk, and the reward is from at least from an outside person who thinks that okay, they're dark and scary. What is the reward? As opposed to other areas. So what we learned from it was what they do is they truly begin with that end in mind. They build a lot of skills. They have tons of technical skills too, but they have an interesting proportion. It's 20% skills, even though most people would think, wow, they practice these procedures hundreds of thousands of times. They have thousands of dives behind them before they go on these things, but it's still much more a matter of shaping character skills. The power skills we talked about before, like the fact that when you teach them, it's very similar to what you do in simulators, both in medicine and for other high performance areas, that you constantly move people into working in that zone of what we refer to as being comfortably uncomfortable. That's unfortunately part of the future, in some ways, fortunately part of the future for all of us, that we're going to constantly be pushed. It's not enough in the future to leave school and then you comfortably do what you've done, what you learned in school, and you do that for the next 40 years of your life. We will be in a situation where we are constantly in transition to learning something new, failing, learning from the failures, and suddenly having to adjust because that's where we can beat the machines. That's what the machine will not become good at for quite a while. And particularly in an interaction with other humans, where unfortunately, large part of our school systems have been forced to limit those interactions because we placed kids in classrooms where there have been limited opportunities to talk to each other. Or in higher ed, we placed them in auditoriums with 300 people watching in one direction. Maybe that's not preparing them from what I'm talking about. And maybe that's not what gives them that inspiration to actually go on life-threatening, maybe they don't have to be life-threatening, but at least things where you're willing to move into your uncomfortable zone where the development really happens.
Oh, that's brilliant. I've been saying for a very long time, learning should be uncomfortable. It's not supposed to be easy.
Check out this video to learn about the true meaning of learning.
We know when a kid is bored, that's when they, definitely show you in other ways that they're bored. And and that learning how to learn conversation has been, quite prominent for a long time. I think it's sometimes the structures around, and that's that rethinking assessment and rethinking that role. So how do you see assessment changing? Have you been seeing some real life examples of systems, or at least school clusters, taking on this challenge of looking at assessment differently? Because what gets assessed gets taught, right? And so, how do we filter it back from there?
So I think the answer is two different things. So there is a way, how do we assess the end goals?
Yeah.
How do we, and I think we can hit two birds with one stone there, because what is the drive the cave explorers? What is it that drives the kids who get super fascinated and in Palo Alto's Media Arts Center, where Esther Wojcicki has shown through decades, the kids who are making this media corporation out of that building, because they're so enthusiastic. They run the newspapers, they run the radio channels, they do all these things. They feel empowered to do. They have a goal. That's what we should look at in the future instead. If you look at an architect, do you look at his exam papers or do you ask to see the buildings he's made?
Exactly.
It's super simple. Like we need to find the inspiration from the people who are driven towards something. How do we actually allow people to find passion around something? And then we evaluate what comes out of the learning. So in order to have learning that matters and real mastery, we need to have the assessment object, the ultimate assessment object, being something that coincides with their passions. What's important on the other side is that on the journey there, realizing my important point about you cannot just ditch knowledge, because how do you do this with no skills? Like you can't, like it becomes meaningless. Even if you were trying to build something with no building blocks, it would get really, really primitive, and you would soon be outcompeted by computers. So if you are to do that, my personal opinion and strong recommendation to all education systems I advise is stop having big summative tests. Stop having the goal being passing the test. Start monitoring what is happening on the way in the learning. And that's where the methods we worked on for the last 2 decades in terms of how to do ultimate formative assessment. And this is where it often goes bad. People think that formative assessment and summative assessment and adaptive learning are just singular things. They're not. It all depends on how well you do it. What level of granularity can you get to? Can you actually very precisely tailor a learning path around an individual? Do we actually, by the end of training, have we actually checked all the things that they've learned on the way? Then you don't need to do any other test. Then it makes no sense to do another test because we already know where they are. But there are other systems that are claiming to do the same thing, whether you're still pretending that you're doing it and you're doing sampling, and you could have huge gaps, and those systems will not work. So one of the things that is critically important, the same way as you need to be critical towards the large language models, whether you can trust the explanation you're getting, we also, as teachers, unfortunately in the future, have to be very critical about the technology we deploy and integrate in our daily practices, because some of it is actually going to really help and other things are not.
Yeah, and I think that's a huge conversation of its own about the discernment needed now in the schools around all of the tech. I mean, there's already been for a very long time ed tech, selling to schools hard with all different silver bullets, and even from my days in the system, different programs selling as silver bullets, and now we have tech being the silver bullet, and I think that's another conversation. But I know what's on a lot of teachers' minds, and that is the big question: is we're going to need more teachers or less in the future? So what is your thought, given all the conversation we've had today and what you've been researching, more or less?
So I've been able to get relatively large audiences to all raise their hands to claim that we need less teachers. Simply because it makes total sense. We have a wealth of information and explanations in our pocket on chat or other things, and it will only get better. My opinion is we need more. And the reason for it is that the skills, like when the dust settles and we realize that, yes, we need a lot more knowledge. Yes, we know how to do this in half the time. That's roughly what you can expect from adaptive systems. But what is left is we have some incredibly hard skills you can't teach them, I'm sorry, but they won't be taught, but they will have to be learned. And in order to create those circumstances that you can learn them in, because it's the same thing with having fun. Like we have a Danish joke where we're laughing. So have fun, for Christ's sake.
Yeah.
It doesn't work that way. You can't just yell at people and tell them to have fun. Like they can pretend, but it's not going to work, right? So the challenge for teachers is now we have to create circumstances that the learners are filling out while they're shaping these skills. They're like rolling stones. They're not shaped by one interaction. They're shaped by multiple interactions over a long time in the right environment. So if that happens, the problem now is we need more teachers to do that, because we are faced with an enormous pressure on elevating the performance when people leave education systems. In order to compete and stay relevant, we need to up our game as humanity. And in order to do that, yes, technology will help. But I know the technology that I think can help most with fixing the problems of the past, that will not be nearly enough to fix the problems of the future.
And I think that's the big juncture that we're in, right? So we have a piling up of problems from the past that haven't been addressed, as well as being smacked in the face with a whole bunch of new ones that we're also just trying to guess. So for the first time in humanity, I don't think we really actually can predict with any kind of accuracy, because there's nothing in the past that can help us do that prediction about where we are, because obviously we've blown out Moore's law and we don't know where we're going to go now.
To learn more about Moore's law, check out this video.
Even the biggest, brightest minds in the whole tech sector are saying, I don't know, we don't know how long it's going to take for AI to be as advanced as, some of the horror stories that people like to present. So it is a very uncertain time. And I think it's very important. As I've been listening to you in this conversation, I've been thinking, well, it's kind of dumb. I mean, we realize, you know that analogy where you say, oh, at the end of your life, when you look back, what are you going to remember? And it's a holistic life. We understand that in our lifetime, we are going to be learning lessons over time, and it's the journey, not the destination. And that's a pretty widely accepted concept about our journey as an individual human, yet we've designed a system that doesn't actually reflect that. And I think what you're trying to say is that let's actually get the system to reflect life and the way that we have to experience, and these power skills are through experience and through the journey, and actually the system itself is part of that life experience instead of being a means to an end to be into a job, because that just is not going to exist anymore, right? The job that you stay in, like you said, for a very long time. It's fascinating. Do you want to comment on that? Otherwise, I'm going to give you another question.
Absolutely. So I think the fundamental shift that we know is going to happen is that there will be no need in the future for the knowledge robots that the education system has producing for the last 80, 90, 100 years. That will for sure be obliterated. It's not there yet. And people think we're already there because we've seen examples of GPT writing a love letter to a toaster.
Yeah.
Already back then we thought, already back then we knew which direction it's going. So that's going to go away.
Yeah.
Which means if we're not focusing education system on what makes humans unique, where we have significant reasons why, like, tech will not go there anytime soon. That's where we need to focus. It's a classic, we've seen a new kind of competitor on the horizon, and we need to deal with it. Having said that, I do think that there are some trends that we can learn from. And one of them is that since the first industrial revolution, with all the things that has happened, have we had to get to more knowledge or less?
Exactly.
It's a very clear path. None of these breakthroughs have demanded that humans should learn anything less in the knowledge domain. What is really important is that what I'm advocating strongly is that we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater and claim that we can just go straight for the human characteristics parts of this learning architecture, because we're in a world that is so heavily dominated by knowledge that we need to do both. We just need to accept the challenge that good ways to deal with the knowledge domain and avoid that it clogs up the system, but it requires that we take it seriously, because otherwise we will never free up the attention and the priorities for the other side of it.
Yeah, that's so amazing. I mean, it doesn't seem to be a surprise then that it feels like, and maybe this is just because the environment I've been in for the last 5 years, but there seems to be a lot of biohacking and trying to make our human bodies more functioning. And it's not a surprise when you think about the fact that we know that we don't use a lot of our brain power, and we've been quite lazy, if you would say, as humans, and we're actually being asked to step up as a human in this world to be able to, as you say, keep building that knowledge, skills, integrate, and that resilience piece comes from those experiences of being in a hyper-changing world. You can't hide from it now. There is no sort of denying that this is happening. Whereas I think people could kind of maybe 10, 15 years ago, just kind of head in sand. So maybe that's probably one of my last questions to you really is, so, on this channel, there'll be people listening that are maybe 20, 30, 40, 50. And we know that there's a huge difference in the way in which we've had technology in our lives over those last 20 something years. And so what do you say to somebody who, he sort of really is already out in the workforce in the later part of their career? Like, what would you say to them to be worried about right now? Because they might not be in the game for a lot of some of these big changes that are going to happen. So what would you say to those teachers that maybe are kind of at the end of their career? Is there anything different to tell them?
So I think that this is such a fast transition that I don't think, unless you're retiring next year, I think this is something we all have to relate to. And we've never seen such a transformational thing before. I'm on the board of one of the top universities in Europe. I think we may have slightly longer than some think, because I think for a lot of people in education institutions, they're panicking right now. I think it's the wrong time to panic, but that's because it's always the wrong time to panic. The really important thing we need to do now is that in times of dramatic change like this, the most important thing is to stay calm and do things efficiently. But we do need to make some really rapid changes. If, like, we're seeing kids being able to do, if you're relying on them doing homework and actually chat can do it for them, Like you have to change tomorrow, right? Otherwise, of course, you can put your head in the sand, as you said, and say, this is not here, but it's here. You can also put your head in the sand the other way, as some institutions did. And my youngest daughter goes to a really fancy university in the US. And the first year she comes home and she says, asks a trivial question in psychology. And I'm like, why did you not just ask Chat about this? Why did you wait several hours before you could ask me? She said, because I don't have Chat. I said, so install Chat, but I'm not allowed to use Chat. I said, you're not allowed to use Chat. Of course you should use Chat. It should be a compulsory thing. Yeah, but the school is banning it, and they don't want us to use our computers or phones during class. And it's like, okay, this is really, really stupid. Like, if you have to sit through another 22 minutes before the lesson is over, and you have questions like this that you could get answers in 30 seconds without losing attention or anything, like here, we install it on your computer, on your phone. Here's an account. Use it as much as you want, and if you get into trouble, I promise I will be there to bail you out. Because no universities and no education institutions should do that. I totally get that at a certain point for younger classes, for pure logistical purposes, this is not going to work. But at this point where we're talking about adults, it's absolutely unforgivable to have an attitude, large language models at that point.
Check out this video for Bianca's take on students utilizing AI.
So putting the head in the sand and saying technology is not here, or to move to only paper and pen-based tests, I'm like, oh my God. Except for some things, because it may be the only short-term option we have for the things where you really do need to be able to do this with no help. So I do think that learning engineering and the way we assess short-term may have to deploy some band-aids really, really fast. But I just hope that some of us can appeal to teachers at all levels of their careers to say, let's not give up. Let's not just use the band-aids. Let's see if we can design the education architecture of the future that makes and creates those circumstances that when the students are filling them out, we actually accomplish those power skills.
Absolutely. I think that can come down to the classroom, like that moment in the classroom. The teacher can choose what they focus on in that hour. Is it getting the thing right and the knowledge, or is it the conversation about that? And again, you know, like you said, and that goes to adults, we can't be blocking any adults from technology. There is an argument for, you know, obviously keeping phones out of, you know, primary school kids' hands inside of classrooms and things like that. And that's a different story.
Totally different. I agree.
Once the adult brain is developed and it's you know, it knows how to learn, and then you're right, it shouldn't be something that is banned. But that's what happens with every piece of technology. Everyone freaks out at first, bans it, freaks it, and then realizes, oh, that's not a good idea because we're not going to stop it. All right, so we've covered a lot of ground, which has been amazing. The last question I always ask everybody, and I probably know the answer, but I'd love to hear you just you know, speak to this question specifically, is what are you the most excited about in education right now?
So I think the most exciting thing in education, and particularly if you see it from a teacher's perspective, is it's a huge opportunity to be able to change from being a source of information to becoming a source of inspiration. And I think that that's the most critical shift in how education should work, that we basically not just flip the classroom in terms of focusing on what do we do the next 10 minutes, because that's possible now. To your point before, I've never met any teacher who would say it's easier to do collaborative working, project-based working if students come completely unprepared. Like nobody will say it's easier if they do that. So if they come with a lot of building blocks, they brought all sorts of stuff, knowledge, capabilities, stuff like that, and now we put it together. Of course, that's easier. Flipping the classroom to focus on the things that they need the most help with is the future as well. But way more important is how do we actually get to the point where you become that source of inspiration, where you're able to get the kids, get at all ages, including adult kids, get them to actually see the purpose of what they could be doing. One of the greatest compliments a friend of mine and one of our advisors through many years was that her very, very famous former student said, the most important thing you told me was I could be anything I wanted to be. And I could do anything I wanted to do. And if you could become that inspiration, and that's a very different thing. I do not blame any teachers. And it's really important for me to state, I do not blame anybody for not having had the energy for that. I'm the son of two teachers, and I could see what happened from from when they were just educated. They actually had me while they were still in uni. And so I followed their career, for all of their career, from the first days in school until they retired. And I could see what happened with them over time. And it got harder and harder. I think they stayed true to many of these values, but it didn't get easier. And therefore, it's something where it's critically important that we create those circumstances, both for the students, but also for the teachers, so that you can allow this change to happen. Because it's not just on the teachers in themselves at all.
Absolutely. It's the whole system. And I think that's where a lot of burnout comes, is because of, most teachers come into it with all heart and all wanting to be part of that. And then the system sort of, well, this definitely happened for me. It's the system beat me down. And so I left, and I decided to work on the outside instead of the inside. And that's happening all over the place. I hear so many stories. I think there could be a whole podcast on the horror stories coming from classrooms right now from teachers about just feeling so out of control and not being able to have that.
Check out this video for valuable strategies and advice to help educators navigate and overcome this growing crisis.
But I really love the idea of information to inspiration, because that is the drive most of the time for every teacher anyway. So let's put that as the conversation, and that might make it all feel a little bit better when we start to see, and hopefully these efficiencies are going to translate to that extra brain space support. Some of the professional development is going to be less about how to do something and more about giving them space to do that work, so it is an exciting time. It's big change, and it can be terrifying at times for people, but I think there's a lot of people, waving the flag of positivity, which you're one of them. So thank you so much for your time today. It's been absolutely brilliant conversation. I'm pretty sure we could do another round, I'm sure, and go into a whole lot of other places. I'm excited for your book to come out. Is it coming out next year?
Yeah, in September.
Okay, perfect. And I love your bookshelf. I'd love to come and visit and actually see the titles on the back there of your real books that you've got. It's nice to see books being kept. I'm trying to bring back a lot of old school things, because I think technology's taken away some of that from us. But really lovely to have you on the channel today. Thank you so much, Ulrik.
Thanks for having me.
And until next time, stay awesome.